So, it's Lord Pasta here with another KSP video, and I don't really have a script this time. This time I'm just going to be going over a mission that I did in sandbox mode concerning this SSTO, the SSTO Model 2.10, which is a large cargo-carrying interplanetary SSTO. Now, this is by no means an efficient craft. It is the product of trial and error. As you can tell, there were 10 other previous versions to this one, the first of which literally exploded whenever it got over 500 meters per second in the atmosphere. I guess the main reason why I'm sharing this craft with you is number one, it took approximately 5 hours for me to actually do this mission, and number two, you don't really see craft like this anymore. The thing is at around 600 parts. It's an SSTO, and it's both interplanetary, which means it can refuel on the go, and it's a cargo-carrying SSTO, which means it carries some form of cargo. Now, I will admit the cargo that it does carry isn't that impressive, but it is a small space station-like object. Now, with most interplanetary auto-refueling SSTOs, the hardest part is actually getting the craft somewhere that it can refuel at. Now, I see most people use Minmus for this, but I have no hassle using the Mun for this, as it's closer, and it's easier to get to for me. I could probably do a Minmus landing, but the Mun is just right there, and I don't know, call me cheap, but you know, if it's right there in front of me, I'm gonna take it. So as you saw earlier, I was making my approach to the Mun very cautiously. I want to make sure that I have enough fuel to land because it's going to be calling it very close. A lot of the lack of fuel can mostly be attributed to my inexperience with types of things like this. I will admit I used HyperEdit for most of my craft consistently for the past 4 or 5 years. So believe me, I know that I'm not doing everything very efficiently. Not at all. Now here you can see I've actually finally successfully landed on the Mun and I'm refueling. There was a quick, cut there, which was due to the fact that I crashed the first time and had to use a quick save. Yeah, look, I wanted to make this video in a day. I didn't want to make it over the course of a month or even 2 months that it would take if I tried endlessly to get everything right the first time in one take. But as you can see now, I have refueled myself and I'm attempting to take off, and I use this hill. It's very effective. And I get myself up to speed, and I'm ready to exit the Kerbin sphere of influence. My target is, of course, Duna, and I will be dropping off my cargo, which is a small space station in orbit of Duna, in a relatively polar orbit. After I visit Duna and take off from Duna, I will then refuel after on Duna on Ike and then return back home, but before then I have to get an encounter, and that's going to be the hard part. After I leave the Kerbin sphere of influence, I will have to spin around and around and around waiting for that encounter to come, and when it does come I'll have to adjust, and so on and so forth. Now, of course, everyone's going to say, why did you take all the oxidizer if you're not going to need it? You're using the nuclear engines to make this burn, and that's true. I probably shouldn't have took all of that oxidizer, but I guess, I don't know, I'm kind of a noob, kind of a little bit of a noob, I don't know. But anyways, I hope you can forgive me for that. Next time, I might do things a little bit differently. Actually, a lot differently, as you'll soon see, well, at the end of all of this. But that's a very long burn, as you can tell by looking at that. That was a very long burn, but it's very efficient thanks to the nuclear rockets. Now, the unfortunate thing for me is, while I have lots of helpful mods that tell me how much delta V I need or how much I have, and vice versa, my thrust to weight ratio, all that fancy stuff that I don't really know how to use, I don't have a mod that actually speeds up my time in time acceleration, which would be very useful for this. So instead, I have to wait the almost 1 hour it takes for me to go all the way around until I get some type of encounter that I can actually use. And quite frankly, it is, quite annoying, but eventually I do get it, and I get it really close, and I attempt to do an aerobraking maneuver around Duna, which is one of my many blunders that you'll see, because this ends up doing little, if anything, to help deaccelerate my speed as I'm entering in that system. Like, doing this whole process, if you would just let me say this, just, off the record, has really given me a lot more respect for people like Matt Lone, the KSP YouTuber, when he builds his SSTOs that go to literally everything in the Kerbin system, or the Kerbol system, which is the sun. The sun is Kerbal. Yeah, it's really impressive. I mean, that must have taken like months to do, I now realize. It's been so long since I've actually tried to do anything like technically significant in the game without using HyperEdit. But anyways, here I'm going in, trying to do the maneuver, the aero brake, to slow myself down. But I know it's not going to work. I know it's not going to slow me down all the way, so I have to get myself ready for it. Actually, initially, before I went into it, I had no clue what it was going to do, and I tried to actually look up other people's attempts of aerobraking on Duna to see what was like kind of like a good range to go in, and I kind of settled on this, which on second thought wasn't nearly low enough into the atmosphere to do really anything. So I ended up having to burn retrograde, which wasted fuel, but I had the fuel to waste, so it was always good. Working with surpluses like this is always my, green zone, my good zone that I'm good in working with in these projects, and thankfully I designed something somehow that's able to do that. So as you can see here, I am slowly moving on in, and we'll cut to, ooh, look at that. The re-entry flame effects looking absolutely beautiful on this spaceship. I know it sounds kind of egotistical coming from me, the person who built it, but, whatever. It's 50% me, 50% the game itself. That's what I say. And if my commentary on my skills in the game technically is anything, I don't really have that big of an ego. But here's where I realize that I'm going to need to burn retrograde. And I line myself and do that, wasting that fuel. And there we go. Eventually I do make orbit. Shortly. Bada bingo, bada bango. And I bring myself down to a place where I'm going to feel comfortable releasing my cargo. So here's a stupid thing that I didn't yet mention about this ship. It was designed all around that cargo hold. And the cargo hold itself is actually it's not in what it looks like. Those decouplers have big open surfaces on either end, but you can't actually go through them. You have to decouple them to, get the craft out. So the entire thing was actually built around something that was supposed to be decoupled from the craft. And it's really only by sheer luck that the craft doesn't have severe structural failures when I decouple that thing, that fairing, and release the cargo, which, as you can see, I switched to and made into a circular orbit. It's kind of elliptical and kind of weird and out of on a weird axis, but it works. The Kerbals are kind of going to be there to observe the planet over the next few years, and then maybe I'll send another mission out with an extension to the station. But here I am going to do the landing mission, and here's where the aerodynamic qualities of the spacecraft come in handy, because typically you see people landing on Duna kind of like how they land on other objects, but except with parachutes. They go straight from up to down, no horizontal movement. I know these are very technical terms, up to down, but you know what I mean. I'm going to do it more like a space plane. As you can see here, I'm going to gradually descend and just touch down like I would if I were flying on Kerbin itself. And it takes a little bit longer, but hey, it's a lot less stressful, and you don't really see it a lot on Duna, because Duna has a very thin atmosphere. And I do eventually have to burn to get myself up in the air a little bit, and eventually I do have to burn retrograde, which is a pretty freaky situation if you ask me. But it all works out in the end, and actually I don't think I would have had enough fuel to make the landing if I didn't do that in the first place. So here's the retrograde burn, very freaky, I know, but I do it. Bada bingo, bada bango. I gotta stop saying that, but that's what I say. And I'm having a little bit trouble getting it on its feet. There we go. Extend all of the radiators, all the solar panels, and hopefully I'll be able to get all of the fuel that I need. Spoiler alert, I do eventually. There we go. I just gotta tinker around with it a bunch to where it actually converts and brings in the right amount of ore to get everything completed. Takes a while for that to happen, but eventually it does. And we're once again ready to take off. Get myself ready. I don't know if this goes good or bad. I kind of forgot at this point, but I think it goes fairly well. Oh wait, no, it doesn't at all. I jinxed myself. I forgot what I did in the past and I jinxed myself. I crashed, and this is one of the crashes that I'm going to include because it's so stupid. I thought that I could just burn and then like just take off. Again, Duna is not Kerbin, and you don't get enough lift to do that. I need all of the power of all of my rapier engines to, actually get myself off the ground. And so eventually that's what I do. It's a little finicky, but there we go. I'm pointing straight up, well, almost straight up, mostly up, and I am ready to get myself in orbit. So obviously getting into orbit around Duna is going to take a lot of my fuel, and I'm going to need to stop by on Ike to refuel. There's no secret about that. So eventually that's going to be my goal, and so I extend this maneuver node out to there, all wonky, but it's all good in the end because I know that Ike, we like Ike, as they say, and it will always be big enough to be there to capture us when we get close to it. And besides, I have all the time in the world for me to wait. And there we go. That's good enough to do my job. And we wait till we get an encounter, and I want to make sure that that encounter is actually intersecting with the planet's surface itself. I don't know if actually that's the most efficient way of doing it. I don't know if going into orbit and then descending is better. I assume it's not, but I just go off of instinct, and it works pretty much every single time to make the trajectory intercepting the planet's surface itself. And it's always hard to figure out when to burn when you're approaching a celestial object like this without an atmosphere. How close do you need to get is the question. Most of the time I just eyeball it because, again, I'm no math genius. So I just kind of test it out, working within those margins, using the margins of fuel, the excess of fuel, to allow myself that liberty. And this is a pretty smooth landing. I just come nice down, and it's pretty smooth, pretty exact, and I think I just boop it like that and plop myself right down. And it's always, I always want to get the sunlight so I'm able to make the process of getting this fuel more efficient, but I always happen to land on the poles. If I were more diligent, I would try to prevent that from happening, but, I'm not. And the mission was a success, well, an almost success anyways, so it doesn't really matter. So I am ready, I am refueled, and here I go. I am ready to take off. Getting myself up to speed, don't want a repeat of what happened on Duna. It almost happened again, but thankfully I bounced upwards instead of exploding, and I was able to get myself out of the influence of Ike. And now my goal is to get myself back home to Kerbin. Now, you might be wondering, what are my plans for the future of this Kerbal Space Program world, which I created specifically to test out interplanetary SSTOs. Well, not specifically interplanetary SSTOs, but just SSTOs in general, just focusing heavily on the interplanetary aspect. So far, I have this, which is a extremely successful version of an interplanetary SSTO on its own, and I have another one which is smaller, and is, kind of like a copy of like Matt Lone's design. So I don't really want to use that one for anything. My plan in the future is to eventually make a even larger version of this SSTO that can carry more cargo. I specifically want it to be able to carry like a very long, piece of a space station to be assembled in orbit over, basically whatever celestial body of your choice. Maybe I could do like an assembly video of that later on, in orbit around Jool or one of its moons. But other than that, this spacecraft in of itself is pretty versatile. I mean, you could change out the cargo for pretty much anything. You could put anything in there with one of those really large docking clamps. Anything that uses that would be something that could fit in there. I could even design a small fighter to go in there. Be kind of an interesting exercise. But this is entirely separate from all of my like military stuff that I typically do in KSP. So here I am once again. I'm trying to get an encounter with Kerbin this time, and it's taking me equally as long. And I think I'm going to use that opportunity to get an encounter there. And I do, and I bring myself in, and that should do it. Something about the end here is I actually don't have footage of me landing the craft, because the first time that I actually attempted this, I crashed on Kerbin. And, well, I didn't crash, actually, I burned up in the atmosphere. And I actually didn't have the time left to record any of the rest of the mission. But if I would have quick loaded to just a few seconds earlier and burned for a few seconds more, I probably could have made this descent into the atmosphere of Kerbin a lot more smoother. Or maybe I couldn't have. Maybe it's just impossible to re-enter the atmosphere of Kerbin. I have no clue. I probably could have just put myself in a decaying orbit that's very slightly different than this. But yeah, as you can see, I'm not going to show the end of that because it's just it exploding, and, my ego is very delicate. But that's about it, and I'll see you next time. I've been Lord Pasta, and goodbye.